George Casey.
Morning,
Good
Dave.
morning.
Good morning.
How are you today, sir?
Alive and well.
I,
Thanks for having me on.
yeah, no, I love it. I love it. So, I mean, this is great. I having you on the show, I got to interview you, I think it was 2 years ago in Arizona at the Housing Innovation Alliance event, which was fantastic. We've spoken, several times in between there. And having you on the show has become a highlight for me because I think this is just so phenomenal. Your background, you started with Toll Brothers, project management, right?
Number one, the first project manager ever.
The first project manager to one of the largest production home builders in the country.
Yeah, then it wasn't that big. I think it was a total of 20 people was the entire size of Toll Brothers at that point.
Yeah, but not now, man.
Not now is exactly right.
Yeah. So you said you're the chair of Housing Innovation Alliance.
Yes.
You're a chair at Vistage.
Yes.
There's more. Tell us your background a little bit.
Basically, I've spent my career in the housing world, housing and master plan community development. And as a leader, hopefully as a thinker, and later in my career, trying to be an agent of change. So I think one of the things that really resonated with me when I read the first McKinsey report back in 2017 was that in 40 years in the business, not much had changed. But I didn't have the data to back it up. And when I saw McKinsey's data that said productivity hadn't changed markedly since 1945, that's when you go home and go, we're number 100. We're number 100. It's got to be better than this. So what do you do about it?
Right. Well, we're going to hop into the McKinsey report and your thoughts on that in just a second. But I wanted to thank everybody who's joining us today. We are live, George, not only on LinkedIn, but we're live on YouTube. We're live on Facebook. Typically, we have people from all those platforms that are going to have some comments, good, bad, and indifferent, and questions, which is a lot of fun. But if everybody could right now, please hit that like and share button. We want as many people to join this conversation. It is a big day for DaveCooper.live. I have the famous George Casey on. At least you're famous to me.
Oh, thanks, Dave.
So
let's get at it.
Let's do it. All right. So, George, we're going to go through. I have an outline put together on the 9 shifts that the report talks about. So why don't we hop into what these 9 shifts are, starting with product-based approach instead of a project-based approach. What is your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is around the idea of, in my mind, of standardization. That essentially the way most buildings are done, they're built for a specific project. So it's new architecture, new engineering. It's done once and then it's done. Whereas a product-based approach is how many times can you take something and do it on a replicatable basis? And in the process of doing that, learn to do it more efficiently, both in terms of materials, systems, labor utilization, and so on, so that you get an advantage of doing it over and over again. And to me, that's the difference here. Too often, both in residential and commercial construction, it's one and done. I think Stuart Miller at Lennar said of the 20-some thousand houses they do a year, not one of them is exactly the same, even though it may be the same floor plan oftentimes, but between the options and what goes into it, it's never the same house. That is a recipe for being inefficient.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we talk about moving to a product-based approach, is this something that the builders can really do?
Yeah, in fact, if you go back to right after World War II, there were several industrialized housing companies. National Housing was one of them, National Homes, that basically took aircraft factories and converted them to making houses. And that worked from 1946 until I think like 1970. If you look at right now, the single family for rent business, the new single family for rent business is a similar kind of thing. They're taking a standard floor plan, 2 or 3 floor plans, and essentially replicating them over and over and built in nice single family homes built specifically for rent. So there's no selectivity in terms of colors or what bathroom you choose or whether you can move a wall. And with that, they're getting both efficiency in building because it's done over and over again, so you learn. But it's also able to go now into factory settings where some of the modular companies are basically looking at doing it because it can be industrialized. So
Right.
with that, you get better, what is I call bending the cost curve, so that you get higher retainability. So I think it's highly important.
So one of the things that we're seeing, being that I'm in the offsite industry, have been for many years, is we're now seeing a big move of architects and designers coming into this space. If we go to a product-based type system, how do you think that's going to affect the tried and true architects that are out there?
Actually, I think it'd be interesting because architects, in my mind, always work best when there are constraints, and it forces you to be creative. And I think there's an interesting modular company in Los Angeles called Proto Homes that has developed a system that essentially has a foundation and a core in it. And inside of that core are all the utilities, the water, the sewer, the electric, and so on. Then they design the modules when they're designing a house so that they back to this core, and anything that uses that kind of thing, sewer, water, electric, is designed in the module so it's very close to the core. So it gives some constraints. You can't put the bathroom way away from the core, so on and so forth. But in the end, you end up with very livable houses. And so to me, that's a product-based approach, that they've got a core thing that makes it efficient. They're designing to that efficiency. Yes, you can have some degree of floor plans in the modules as you back it to it. But you know what? Always you're going to have the stuff that needs those utilities close to it. And that's the way it is. But with it comes a high degree of efficiency.
Yeah, absolutely, a high degree of efficiency. I mean, it makes sense. How many of us sit out there all the time and wait for the water to get warm in our sinks?
Right. You're right.
If everything's centralized around that core, you don't waste as much. And that's just a simple example.
But that's really building systems-based thinking.
Love it. Love it. You were talking a little bit about specialization.
Yeah, this is the way I think about this is that over time, we've got to learn how to be able to do things in construction that are both systemic and specialized. So in my world, we have someplace around 50 subcontractors that we bring in and suppliers that come in to build a house. Yet, when you think about it, you could do the entire frame of the house in a factory. In fact, there are several people that do that right now and bring it out, put it in place. Then we have an exterior siding, an exterior painting, exterior roofing, exterior trim. Why couldn't that be one subcontractor, a super sub, that does all of those things, that learns to be efficient in its handoffs to one another, rather than the Lucy on the candy line kind of program that we have right now? So, to me, this whole thing of handoffs and eliminating and simplifying handoffs is a key to being able to think about doing this stuff, but it's specialization at a larger scale.
Sure. So you'd have the manufacturing of the components, the panelized, the modular, get the efficiency of that repetitive product, and then have a super sub, a trade in the field that just step and repeat all the way through and become super efficient with less trade, less labor, less skill.
And even if you didn't have the modules, you could still stick build the way we do right now, but just have fewer subcontractors doing it. But those subcontractors are doing multiple things right now. So if you think inside, there's no reason why you couldn't have a subcontractor that does plumbing, electric, mechanic, all the systems inside of a house. That be one, rather than have it be 3 or 4. And therefore, the coordination is much more easy. They can learn the efficiency of doing it. And that will inure ultimately to the benefit of the customer.
Sure, which adds to the value chain.
Yeah. So I think this one's interesting. I oftentimes wonder whether the framers work for us or we work for the framers.
Everybody works for the framer, George.
Right.
We all know that.
But how many times do you have a company that has its major relationship to a customer not be in control fully of its supply chain? And I think what you're going to be seeing in this kind of idea is that your supply chains, you're going to have to look at what is the value added each step of the supply chain. And right now, the only value added is storage. When you get to wholesalers, distributors, so on and so forth. And sometimes customer contact with the next level down the chain. That stuff can be digitized and done with Zoom, done with digital tools. And so I think what you're going to do is see a shrinking of the supply chain, but adding higher value at the end, which will be technical solutions for the builder along with the materials, or that they're actually doing production along the supply chain. Again, I look at LP and Decra and their joint venture. LP is jumping several levels of the supply chain to provide lumber to the factory. And Tekra is doing its FIOS system with the builder, designing the house on BIM, and then coming back and manufacturing the frame components in the factory. But that is a combination of labor, materials, and value add that is way more than most others are doing. And it's a way for LP to ensure supply chain.
Sure. So do you think it's going to be the suppliers, the manufacturers, the builders? Who's really going to help make this change all come about?
Frankly, it's going to be those who are entrepreneurial. If you've got an entrepreneurial builder, they could actually go partner with an LP or a Georgia Pacific or whatever and create the venture that does this. It could be coming the other way. If you've got an entrepreneurial building product manufacturer, they could go up the chain and do it. Or what you're seeing right now is outside entrepreneurs with capital coming in and saying, I'm going to disrupt and I'm going to do it because neither end is doing it. So you can see it happen multiple ways, but I think the common thing is going to be who's entrepreneurial and willing to think differently and then execute on that.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, we're going to see lighter weight materials. We're going to see a different thought process on how we're using materials. All of this, like you said, with like what Jerry's doing with his FIOS, it's the different way of thinking that's going to change what we're doing. And I see a lot of that also already happening. It's happened in Europe. Do you see a lot of that coming this direction?
Yeah. I mean, Europe is very interesting to me, and actually Japan is also, in just how they've thought about construction as a manufacturing process that involves design, engineering, and solves a customer's problem, and then using very efficient ways to produce the product. So it's really customer-centric at its core, but it's also very systems-oriented at its core. Most home builders don't have that kind of a background. And so these concepts are somewhat alien to the thinking and the training that many home builders have had.
Sure. Well, I mean, there's a few early adopters of panelization in the home building world. Toll Brothers is one of them, correct?
Yeah, I was there. I mean, we did it in 1983, 1984. Yep. NVR is another one. I mean, it's interesting. Those are two major national public builders who, wherever they can, have their own factories to do things. And what's interesting is both of those are some of the sharpest pencil guys you'd ever want to meet. If it doesn't work, they're not going to keep doing it. Toll's been doing it now, for almost 40 years? NVR has been doing it since, in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. And so it's there, it can be done. But it took a huge lift because you have to also have different financial thinking. You would think of purchasing as normally apples to apples. What's the cost of panels and trusses versus lumber and labor? What is missed in that is all the ancillary that happens. How much more speed can you get? What does that speed mean in terms of overhead per unit, real estate taxes per unit, HOA subsidies per unit? All of these things that are beyond a typical purchasing manager's purview have to be considered when you're doing these evaluations of alternate building systems. And frankly, I don't see many builders set up to be thinking that way.
Right, right.
Huge opportunity.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think before we go to the next one, which is going to answer a lot of that when we get into the technology investment that's going to be required, let's put a few comments up there. How about it, George? You want to say hello to the audience?
Yeah, hello.
So we have well, good old Mark Willie from BS Friday, Passive House and BS will take us to a carbon-free net zone. That's Mark Willie. Do you know this guy?
Hey, Dennis. Good morning.
Morning, Dennis from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Thank you for joining us, Dennis. Dennis is the president, for all of you who don't know him, of the Housing Innovation Alliance. They're doing great work. And hey, George, you just happen to be the chair. So
yeah, that's good. Yeah, love it when a plan comes together.
Yeah, we got Rick Hawkins from Atlanta joining us. We have and Osama Alabi. So Osama sent some questions in. We're going to get to those as well.
Oh, I've got the vision of Lucerne, Switzerland right now, and you know it's a nice picture.
Yeah,
good for you, Osama. I'm envious.
Have you been there before, George?
I have been to Lucerne.
Love it. I wonder if you know this guy here,
Rodney. How you doing, buddy?
Love it, love it. And George Casey, we trust. All others bring data. You know,
that's actually from I believe Deming. In God we trust, all of those bring data.
Yeah. We have Synergy Steel joining us today. Tom Reddy. Hi, Tom.
Hey.
Anthony Good. Whoop, I jumped one. So my thing moved. So Andrew Seeley joining us. Hey, Andrew. Great to see you this morning. Here's a question, George.
Yeah.
This is the one from Osama. I'm going to read it and then take it off so we're not blocked. How can the knowledge exchange between Europe and USA on industrialized construction be improved? For example, what should a European company be providing turnkey factories for residential units best to do support the USA market? Specifically, how to find suitable local partners. That's question one.
Yep.
Why don't we answer that first, and then I'll put it back up for question two.
Yeah. First of all, I think I'll do the quick pitch for the Housing Innovation Alliance. That's a good spot to start. That it's where essentially builders, architects, engineers, building product suppliers, money, technology companies all come together working on this stuff. So you get put in the room or in the group of people who are thinking about that. And that's kind of the best way to help find a partner for doing it. In my mind, I think about it, if you look at the European model, the most logical partner for doing this, number one, is probably building product suppliers. So that's where I'd look first. But there's also a thought process that several of the large master plan community developers are looking at having factories put in their master plans early on to produce the housing that will be in those master plans. And oftentimes these master plans are 10, 20, 30 years of lots ahead of them. And so I'd be looking there also for potential partners. What was question number two, Dave?
Let's go back here. Question number two was, Europe also builds a lot with load-bearing blocks, bricks, which reduce the inaccuracies caused by on-site work, concrete pouring, or framing of columns and beams, as well as being cheaper and providing tighter. Doesn't look like you got it all in there. I have actually.
Yeah. I think the issue here is the labor force or the technology to put blocks and bricks in place. That skill set at least from a trade standpoint, is pretty skinny in the U.S. And again, it depends on what part of the country that you're in. But that to me would be the tougher thing. You've got an entire system set up based upon either wood or steel construction,
yeah,
or some combination of the two. And that is a huge lift to shift to go to the other. Right now, block and brick, for the most part, is decorative, not load bearing, in the U.S. Although there are some buildings that are done. Most commonly, if you're using concrete product, it's usually precast tilt-up panels that are used. That is more common. And again, you'll see that mostly in an industrial and commercial space. I've actually done precast tilt-up in residential in Florida, where block is required by hurricane code. And this is back in the late 90s, early 2000s. We actually did precast tilt-up then.
So a follow-up to his question, because I have the other half of it here, is, how do you start reintroducing this technology here in the United States as an additional choice?
How do you start? That's a tough lift, man. It is a tough lift. My guess is it would be go to where it is at least somewhat common. And the most logical spot would probably be South Florida, where you got the hurricane code. Maybe actually Florida. I'm thinking the hurricane code goes to many coastal areas. That's where I'd go first, because it's actually something that is at least used right now. Other parts of the country, it's not even in the vernacular.
Yeah. Yep. Great. All right. So let's get back into the next questions, and we'll come back to some more. So where we left off was talking about how does this shift happen, right? What are some of the investments that these companies are going to need to make? And that gets into investment in R&D, technology, and facilities. And I know this topic you like.
Yeah, this is one that's interesting. That I have this phrase that I use, that organizations tend to do the things they're organized to do. Kind of sounds like it's Yogi Berra, but it's true. And that most building companies that I know of have no one in senior management who's charged with research and development, and rethinking how you might do your business. If you're not thinking about it at a high level in an organized way, it's probably not going to be done. I think the R&D and technology things are really the things that'll drive the future. And right now, I don't see it happening inside of existing players. You can see R&D happening in building products manufacturers around the types of products they use, but not in the systems that are being used to build, and factories and that kind of thing. So that's why I think this area actually is most wide open for entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, combinations of entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, and so on, basically doing this stuff and then monetizing it and commercializing it. Smart building companies will try to do this, but I don't know how many of them actually are organized to do it. This to me comes back to, if you're on a board of directors of one of these companies and haven't mandated a organizational change to focus on this and what R&D in terms of both products and business models will be, you're probably almost negligent in your duties as a director in this stuff. This will be the difference. Otherwise, if you're not doing this, you're just going to become less and less and less margin. And all I know is no margin, no mission, and somebody else will figure it out.
Yeah. What do you think is the first place to start investing in? Is it BIM? Is it augmented reality? Like, where should these companies be turning to, in your opinion, George, for the answers?
The first thing is organizationally. Are you set up to think about doing it? And if the CEO wants it done, he'll organize to get it done. If it's not, it's a exercise in futility. So that's the first spot that you start.
Yeah.
It happens to be leadership. If you have the leadership, I really believe it is a vision of what the business looks like 10 years from now. And in that case, it is this world of actually probably having most of either the major components or subcomponents built in factories. And the choice is, do you want them to be your factories, or do you want them to be factories you JV with somebody, or do you want to be buying it from someone? And so rethinking that commercial relationship. And then the final one is deciding what business model you want with respect to your customer. Do you want to be bespoke and relatively high price, no matter what size house you're doing? Or do you want to figure out how to standardize and get operating efficiency so you can get higher retainability no matter what the price point is? But those are core strategic questions that you have to ask before you decide whether it's going to be FiOS or not, whether you're going to be using super subs, whether all of that stuff is a derivative from the core strategic question of what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always had this vision that the offsite manufacturing world would set up like Amazon distribution centers, and all the bigger players out there could put product through these distribution centers, because I mean the investment in manufacturing facilities is not a cheap one.
No, and in fact, the ding on them from a builder standpoint has always been they work great when the market's good, but when the market slows down, you got this huge capital cost that is an anchor. What I think people are missing is the strategic importance of the growth of the new single-family home built for rent market. That market is much less volatile than the for sale market. You're not having to worry about mortgage rates, what banks are thinking, so on and so forth. And I really think that the combination of that business growing up and understanding now how factories really can work across multiple things. They don't have to do single family for sale. They can do single family for sale, for rent, multifamily, wood-based commercial structures, so on. When you understand that it is the process of designing with architects, engineers, and trades up front, coming up with a perfect set of things that you run through a factory, that can be apartments, it can be attached, detached, whatever.
Right.
And when you understand that, that can take the variability out of the factory and probably make the economics look better.
Love it. We got a question. I'm gonna put it up on the screen. This is let me see. Is this the right one, Jennifer? Oh, here it is. So this is, I don't know why, John, you must have your LinkedIn profile as private. John Sicilian, technology and marketing budgets being separate. Many have overlapping budgets, not putting money towards R&D and tech purely. So I guess it's more of a comment than a question, but
no, but I think it's right. I mean, that This is, again, if you were to go inside of, and I've been inside of multiple builders and their both their income statements, the cash flow statements, and their balance sheets, and R&D doesn't exist. Marketing exists. You can see marketing being spent as a line item. You can see marketing costs being capitalized up as an asset.
Yep.
So on. R&D just doesn't exist. And so I think it's the understanding of the importance of why you need R&D. And it's R&D both in process and business models, and in terms of technology. All of those things, you know, unless you separate them out and understand who owns them, that's one of the first questions. If nobody owns it, it ain't going to get done.
Right. You know, well, accountability is always a big thing in any organization.
Yeah.
So why, George? I mean, you know, home builders, production builders, big builders, you know, we're not a dumb industry. There's a lot of really smart people in this industry just to build companies the sizes that they are. Why are they not doing this? What has stopped them versus every other manufacturing plant, Amazon, all of them? Why us?
Because essentially it is not, most people who run home building companies don't come from this kind of world. They come either up from having been a carpenter tradesperson, or they come up from some kind of project management, or oftentimes they come out of legal or financial. because inside of home builders, the biggest asset that you're playing with all the time is land. And that tends to be where people who run the company come through. Those people in land rarely have seen the inside of a factory. I remember, this is 15 years ago, making a presentation to the senior management of Masco. And I asked a question: how many of you have read the book, The Goal by Eliyahu Goldratt? Literally everybody in the room threw up their hands. I then went a couple of weeks later to my Urban Land Institute Residential Building Council meeting. 50 CEOs of home building companies, architecture companies, so on and so forth, said, how many of you read The Goal? I think 3 hands went up in the room. If you don't understand the basis of process management and the theory of constraints, you know what? That is like you haven't learned to quite write with your right hand or left hand yet. And it is so basic to the understanding of manufacturing, yet there's been no exposure to it because historically nobody has done it.
Right. So there, you just gave everybody some homework that has not done it. I love it.
It's great. It's a business book in the form of a love story. Guarantee when you pick it up, you will not put it down.
All right. We'll put the links in that so people can find it. We'll look it up.
It's also an audio book, so it's no excuses.
Love it. So it's perfect for somebody like me.
Yeah.
So we were talking a little bit earlier about the consolidation and vertical integration, and we touched on it just a few moments ago a little bit on how these companies will get into it, and then we're going to get into some more comments and questions. So, what's your thoughts on this?
Yeah, this is a big thing out of the McKinsey study. That really an understanding that it's structure of industry that needs to be changed, as well as attitude. One of them is the consolidation piece. You were already seeing it on the home builder side. You're going to see it on the supplier side. But I think the more important thing is vertical integration. That there's a question now of what value each step of the chain adds. And if you look at it, in reality, there's not much value added when you start looking at wholesalers, distributors, lumber yards. It's typically storage and relationship to a customer. And a lot of that stuff can be done using digital tools, and can be also used with other forms of distribution. And again, what I mentioned is, if you look at LP and Integra, that to me was a vertical integration that makes all the sense in the world, because you're both taking product and you're adding a technology solution for the end customer. Now you got something that's way more valuable than what you had before. But it takes a rethink in terms of how this is done, but expect to see this whole idea. This is how Europe has evolved in terms of this vertical integration piece. Expect to see it here is the only thing I can say.
All right. Well, we're going to see it. We're going to see new entrants into the market. Do you think with this consolidation, vertical integration, companies like Katerra, can they be successful in this next norm coming up?
Yeah, I mean, Katerra really bit off a big chunk of the elephant. But I think the idea is the right one. That how do you think about eliminating the inefficiencies that happen across multiple handlers of information or handlers of materials? And secondly, how do you more standardize what you're doing? And in doing that, get more efficiency out of running a factory. I remember going into Blueprint Robotics up in Baltimore with the Alliance a year and a half ago. And their story about having started as kind of trying to do one-off stuff through a factory and understanding that there wasn't a lot of efficiency in doing it. And then the evolution to starting to do more standardized and repetitive product so that they could have a learning curve and become way more cost efficient in doing it. I think that understanding of the importance of simplicity is really a piece that really has to resonate here.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Listen, if you're just joining us, we are live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook with the one and only George Casey, right next to the one and only Rodney Hall, who we're going to put a question up from here in 1 second.
Okay.
Please hit that like and share button. And if you have questions, now's the time to start putting them in, because we're getting close to our Q&A. Rodney Hall, To what degree will process-centric building limit the customer's choices, if at all? Does efficiency impose any limitation on customer choices?
Okay, leave that one up, because do you mind leaving the question up? Rodney's got the right thing here. And process-centric, in its most pure form, will limit customer choices. But one of the choices should be, do I value better pricing, better value, as opposed to getting exactly what I want, which brings some degree of complexity into the system. With complexity becomes more cost and less time. So it does, at its beginning point, impose a limitation on customer choices. I think the question is, can you let the customer choose which way they want to do it? It's also a learning curve. We don't know how to do simple processes yet. If you get simple processes down, you can do more complex processes. I mean, if you look at the major suppliers of housing in Japan, there is a lot of customer choice that is allowed in that system. But I would argue, if you went back to the genesis of that system, it was a simple system that they first learned to develop their processes. We have leapfrogged into complex without ever having an understanding of the processes that we use. And therefore, we never learned to do it. It has to be, you have to go back to grade school, learn to do it simple. And I would argue along the way, we can learn from doing that. That's why I think the single family for rent stuff is highly important, because out of that will become an understanding of what really is the cost of complexity. And then if customers want to choose that, you should be able to let them have it, but understand there's a cost to it. And do you charge for that cost? And is it worth doing when you have limited resources?
Love it. Great answer. Another question, Anthony Goudet, George Casey, what approach would compel the bigger players to take on R&D and organizational change? Some would argue it is necessary to compete. Does that conversation revolve solely around cost right now?
Yeah, leave that one up. That's a good one. I always like Tony Soprano. Tony said you get more with nice words and a gun than nice words alone. Really, what approach would you compel bigger players to take on R&D? It basically has to come either directly from the CEO or from the board. This is one where you have to understand the strategic counterfactual, that if you don't do it, what will happen? And history says that your margins won't be as good as they would, and you have the higher probability of either going out of business or someone else taking you over. So this goes back to the reptilian brain, that if you want to survive, you ought to be doing this. If you don't want to survive, don't do it. It is necessary to compete, because only through this can you create additional value adds that are non-commoditized. And with that, you get higher margins. Higher margins allow you to do more things. If you get lazy and don't do it, your margins ultimately shrink, because everybody else starts copying you, because there is no advantage that you have. Answer, done. QED, as they would say in the math book.
Love it, love it. With a side note to, did you say Sopranos?
Yeah, that's right.
We hit everything on this show, George.
That's right. Management by Soprano.
If I knew you were going to have Sopranos, I could have put in some clip from the show real quick and set you up with The Godfather. All right. Moving on, then we're going to get back some more questions, because there's a lot of comments. We got Jerry McKinney joined us out there.
Jerry.
So, hey, Jerry, we're gonna put some of your comments up here in a minute as well. All right. So, internationalization. So we answered a little bit about with Osama coming into this country, right? You know, in his product. Give us the download on your thoughts on this.
Yeah, the internationalization ultimately happens first with the idea of a different way that things can be done. The U.S. is not the font of all great knowledge. And if you look at the way housing and construction are done in Europe, in Japan, in Korea. There are fabulous lessons to be learned. And so the lessons are out there. So the first thing is, do you study them and understand it? And second, who will act as the honeybee of bringing those lessons into the United States on an entrepreneurial basis? You know, if Jerry's on here, Jerry took his lessons from England and Ireland and basically said there's no reason why they can't work in the US, and decided to be an entrepreneur and honeybee the idea and the system that he had into the US. What's interesting, I've actually visited Jerry's engineering offices in Monaghan, Ireland, and it's fabulous just seeing people working at this stuff using digital technology, bouncing back and forth between California and Monaghan, which has got to be like 7 or 8 time zones, getting stuff done. On the other hand, you have several of the large Japanese housing companies essentially buying US platforms and using those to both learn the US market, but to begin to apply the lessons that they have on industrialization and efficiency in making residential product. So it can happen from either side. It can happen entrepreneurially or via acquisition. But the reality is that right now, both those methodologies will be at work inside the US economy. And US players can either choose to ignore it and die, or figure out how to compete. Or I guess the third thing is just sell to them because they don't want to compete. But the internationalization is here. It's not going to go away.
Well, we're seeing it already. I mean, they're shipping volumetric all the way from Poland, England. They're doing projects on the East and West Coast right now.
3 years ago, I was in Vietnam for 2 weeks, and I was in Cam Ranh Bay watching a Marriott hotel go up with modules built in Poland and shipped to Vietnam, and a Polish crew putting the modules in place. So there you go.
Yeah, it's definitely here to say. You mentioned Vietnam. I want to say you're a veteran. Thank you for your service.
Yeah, thank you. 2 tours.
Hoorah. Love it. So, all right. That's kind of what drove this whole conversation, George, with us. Is I had several people from overseas as well as here saying, hey, we got to talk about this McKinsey report. And it's very true. There's a ton of interest overseas right now in the US market, in Canada, coming down. And I do believe, for those watching out there, that the change is coming, the change is happening. And I think paying attention to what you're talking about today is very, very important for these tried and true builders.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to the guys at McKinsey, because in the report they did back in 2017, it was actually the imprimatur that they gave to a problem we already know, but their brand they put out, the study that they did that said, hey, you know what? Compared to every other industry, construction has gone nowhere since 1945. In fact, since 1960, it's gone backward. And, that should be just an embarrassment to anybody in the industry. And it was them bringing that to light that I think at least got some of the competitive juices going, and saying, why are we that bad? So to them, they deserve all the accolades, because they finally shone a light on it. And it was a light that had just great credibility behind it that forced people to really consider it. It wasn't a flake trying to do it or anything. It was real stuff. And so McKinsey, thank you.
Yeah, definitely. And Jan Misch was good. He actually got back. He just wasn't able to change his schedule, but Jan was one of the partners at McKinsey that actually helped put this whole report together. So shout out to him as well for an excellent job, for sure. So in other words, George, what you just said is open your eyes, get on board, or you're going to get run over, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah. Lead, follow, or get out of the way.
It's exactly it. Love it. Love it. All right. Sustainability, George. This is another big portion of what's happening in our society. And it's going to take a major place in construction.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple layers of the sustainability onion. One of them is the whole idea of waste of time, waste of materials. And what we're seeing is that I'll call the industrialization of construction, moving modules, submodules, whole modules into factory settings, has allowed both material efficiency and reduction in waste, time reduction of waste, and I would probably guess that energy utilization is less also. But the bigger one here that COVID-19 has brought to bear is the whole idea of healthiness, that understanding the homes that we live in have to not only be energy efficient, but luckily when you do energy efficiency correctly, you also end up with very healthy homes in terms of materials used or not used, and an understanding that the mechanical systems are almost organisms in a home, that they have to be set up right at the beginning, but they have to be maintained in order to continue to have a healthy place to live. Filters need to be changed, humidity needs to be adjusted, and so on. And I think that the understanding of the connection between the environment of the air inside of a home and kids' things like asthma and so on are just really there. And there's an opportunity for a service piece here for builders to be, how do you take the monitoring that you can do and say for a customer, we can act on this monitoring if you'd like us as a service, and make sure that we're taking care of the stuff that maybe you don't know how to. So to me, a whole sidelight here on the customer is that how often do we look for residual income opportunities with our customers? Most builders I know don't think of customer service other than I take care of warranty and then I try to run away as fast as I can, rather than how do I keep an ongoing relationship with a customer that allows me to do things for them, keep an economic relationship, and let that play out over years, rather than just have it be a one-time transaction.
100%.
So, sustainability across multiple ideas of the onion.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to put a comment up here by Mark Willie as well on this, but I agree 100% with you said. We should be living for customer referrals, not how fast we can get away from them.
Yeah.
And that's the ongoing relationship.
But it involves a rethinking. For example, what is a warranty department really should be customer service, like when you go to an auto dealer. They'll sell you the car, but the reality is they want you coming back, every 3 months or whatever to have the oil done. If something, you know what? We should be doing the same thing. And you know what? We're not.
Yep, we're not. We should. I love your soapbox, George. It's like mine. Let me put this up here real quick. Mark, Build Small. This is from our BS Friday. I've been learning so much about what you're saying. Lessons learned from Sweden. Who will be the honeybee delivering Passive House to the U.S. and who will get stung for not producing quality, durable, resilient, efficient structures with natural materials and net zero using renewable and rooftop gardens?
This is one where I've learned that not all customers are created equal. That there are customers that very much value. Can you leave that back up there again?
Sure can.
That value very much the Passive House idea, net zero, all of this stuff. If you go to Gene Myers in Denver, Thrive Homes, he and others in the Environment and Energy Building Alliance, EBA, do this stuff. And there is a segment of the population that values these features and will preferentially go for them. But not all horses go to the same water. There are other people that just do not value it and, won't do it. They're looking for something else. It may be interior features they would rather spend their money on, or it might be a larger house with less amenities that they want to do it. to me, this is a piece of what we should be offering, and understanding what customers wanted. I believe that over time, this market segment probably does grow. But I don't think it's the kind of thing that can be forced down someone's throat like cod liver oil.
I'm not drinking cod liver oil.
Yeah, you're gonna love it, man.
I'm just not doing it. I don't care what you try and sell me. That ain't happening.
Yeah.
All right. Love it. So let's get through, and then we'll wrap up with going through our list here of the final Q&As. All right.
Yep.
All right. So we went through sustainability. Now we're in customer centricity and branding.
Yeah, this is good stuff. I already started touching on this, that really understanding the customer. So the first is, what do they value? So I hit a little bit of that before, talking about passive house type stuff. Some value it, some don't. Energy efficiency, yes, no, so on. So understanding the customer, but also leading the customer, I think is also important, to show them the benefits of doing things. But I think this other thing that we talked about, of how do you handle customers' pain with regard to housing on a more broad basis, other than just creating the house for them in a transaction. And this falls very much into the Japanese model of, they're there, they'll provide a service to come back to the house and check you up, to upgrade your house. If you want to tear the house down and build another one after 50 years or 100 years, we can do that too. But it is an ongoing relationship with the customer. This is somehow antithetical to home builders, where it is religion to almost any other kind of supplier of products or services to customers. And just like I talked about before, somehow most builders don't understand the importance of process control, process improvement, so on and so forth. Most don't get into this game of understanding that your customer is a valuable asset, that both for intelligence of what you can and should do in the future, but also if you're able to understand their pain, it helps you with both your product decisions, but also opens up a way of getting recurring revenue from a customer that you spent a lot of time and money acquiring. And the branding side of it is just the thing of, what do you mean to a customer, and the way you choose to treat customers. By the way, the evolution of the single family for rent new home market gets into this all the time. You've got an ongoing relationship every month with a customer. And how do you understand what they're doing? How do you keep them in the home? How do you raise them up to another home? You naturally have this relationship going on. So it's interesting on that side of the equation. It seems to work.
So what are they doing that the traditional, build and sell home builder isn't doing? Are they doing reports? Are they sitting down with their customers? Are they doing surveys? How are they building a better brand and relationship with their customer, George?
It is all of those. It is, obviously the market research up front, but it is in the culture and the way you choose to engage with customers from the beginning. That's the branding piece. I think the ones that do it very well have a way of understanding the customer, listening to the customer, and then servicing the customer. By the way, there are some out there that choose not to do that. They, are more transactional and kind of flip the customer off, and but have a good price, and the customer puts up with a good price for being treated like dirt. I would suggest that that's probably not a good business model, but there are people who use that business model. I believe that ongoing, the companies that figure out how to engage and stay engaged with customers on an authentic basis are the ones that will have the longest term great economic value for their enterprise.
Love it. I love it. There are some good companies out there that are doing great branding. I know, like Taylor Morrison, Cheryl Palmer and her team, Garmin Holmes, she's doing a great job as well. Do you anybody else that our audience could take a look at that's doing a great job?
Yeah, again, I go back to Thrive Homes. Gene Myers, I think,
Yeah.
does and actually interesting on the flip. I actually think Toll Brothers does an interesting branding. Yes, to the customer, but if you look at their Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, they're branding toward their existing employees and future employees. That they're showing that it's an interesting place to work. You can be involved in the community. You can be doing good things, which to me is, when you think about it as an enterprise, you really have two markets. One is your customer, and the other is your employees and future employees. Those are two different marketing programs, but great companies figure out how to do both of them, and that makes them more sustainable.
It's an interesting comment. If you think about all the things that we just discussed in the list above, right, that we just went through, if these companies start implementing technology, reinvesting in R&D, they're going to find that the younger, smarter generation is going to want it's going to help them bring them into the industry. Yes.
Yeah. And so this gets to the broader thing that somehow the industry has to become more attractive to a broader range of people to look at it as a career. And unfortunately, if you look at it from the trade side, I think being a tradesperson is the least attractive thing for people looking for a job. The only thing worse is, I think, being a cowboy. And, it is, how do you make things that feel like exciting companies doing interesting things for the world, for customers, and making it a relevant and sustainable career is what brings great people in. If you don't do that, you don't get the best choice of people to do exciting things.
Yeah.
So this is the transition actually to the great number 9 here.
Yeah, for sure.
Investment in human resources, which to me is human resources is, in my word, a synonym for culture. That culture is defined as the way we do things here. And to me, if you have a great culture, you will find great people. And again, the exposure of people into culture is important. You're talking about Cheryl Palmer early on. Mm-hmm. Cheryl's background actually goes back into the Dell Web Corporation, which had a very unique and great culture. And the way they approached things, the creativity they did, and so on. And it's no surprise that people that came out of the Dell Web culture early on really have done very well. They were just chosen, but they were also taught how to think about customers, how to think about the work environment, how you treated each other, how you made things exciting, how you listened, how you had humility. I mean, it's all of those things. I know that one of Cheryl's mentors is Ann Mariucci, who, exemplified those things. And when I look at Cheryl, in many ways, I see a lot of Ann. And you know what? Just great mentors create great mentees.
Yeah, I agree with that. So culture. I mean, that's what it's about, is it not?
It is.
Companies?
Yeah, it is. Culture is the glue that keeps a company together. It's the way we do things here. When you have a strong culture, you end up with a place usually that good people want to work. And with that comes the ability to do R&D, the ability to think about doing things differently, the ability and the desire to engage with customers, the ability and the desire to take things and break them and make them better, the ability to look at new business models of doing things. And all of those have a result that comes out in the bottom, which usually ends up being a better return on assets, better profit margins. And with those better margins comes the ability to continue to do exciting things. It's a virtuous cycle.
So, George, we're going to get into just some comments and questions, and then I'm going to let you give us your conclusion on your overall opinion on the McKinsey report.
Yeah.
And that'll be a wrap. So We had actually a fairly relevant comment here. I'm not sure the name doesn't pop up, but I want to give a call out. It's Deborah Wyatt, Sicilian Partners.
Yeah. Hi, Deb. Nowhere.
So, and George, just so you know, I know you can read these. I read them when I make my comments, but based on the system, they don't all show up on all the same platforms. This way, people on other platforms know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
How can our industry appeal to those that are currently unemployed from other areas? Their fresh perspective can help with the shift needed.
I think it is really an authentic discussion of what the vision of the future of a home builder, if you might, would look like. I always am remarkably impressed of the value of the hazy watercolor, the future that is not in sharp detail, but is in enough detail that you get an idea of what it looks like. And if you said, you know what, the home builder of the future has these kinds of things. They have a chief strategy officer. They have someone who's worked on R&D. The management team is multi-gender, multicultural, multi-age, that we do both for sale and for rent. We're looking at different ways to engage with our customers and figure out how we can solve their housing pain points, the way they live, how they live. You know what? Those are all things. What we know is that since time immemorial, people need a roof over their head. We're providing that kind of a service, and how we do it in a modern way, we're looking for people who want to think about doing that. If that's what you want to do, come here.
Love it.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Perfect story. Here's a comment from Jerry.
Hey, Jerry.
Investment in factories fail in a downturn because the business model is wrong. You need to be grade-based in single-family residential, multifamily, light commercial, office, hotels, medical, etc. That's how it works in Europe, and why a single builder owning an offsite biz can cause problems.
Absolutely. That's my comment earlier on, the importance of the single family for rent business. Was a piece of this, that's a modulator in demand. But Jerry's right. When you think about it, it's a process that you're doing, and the process doesn't care whether it's a house for sale, a house for rent, a townhome project, a multifamily project, a school, a commercial building. Those are all outputs from an input, which comes from an idea and a need. What's needed? How do we design that and engineer it in the most efficient way possible, using the players doing it, building that together using digital tools, BIM or whatever, to think about the way that it is best put together for a system, and then go execute that system. But it is in the intellectual upfront. I think I'm giving Jerry's story as well as I can. It is in that intellectual collaboration up front that allows you to do it. The braid is that by having multiple products that go through, you're still using essentially the same system. That allows you to come across different cycles of segments of the economy. And he's correct. Just having a single builder owning an offsite business, you become so focused on one piece that you lose these other elements that allow you to sustain long term. By the way, Jerry taught me long ago that the best thinking done in this is actually with a dram of Redbreast, ideally the 21, single pot Irish whiskey.
Jerry, I have not gotten that lesson yet. I'm disappointed. I'm gonna wait for that lesson.
And if you can't get that, you get either the yellow spot or the green spot.
Well, I'm all in, being a whiskey lover myself, so I love little unknown there. Anthony Gu, George Casey, in terms of business continuity for facilities, would we suggest that fabricators have a significant % of revenue come from institutional build for rent?
I think so. Again, these are customer relationships that don't turn on and off on a dime. Therefore, like a good portfolio manager, you have your bets spread across multiple asset categories. If I were a fabricator, I would figure out how to have a commercial relationship with single family builders, multifamily builders, for rent builders, townhome builders, commercial people, and so on. That in doing that, you have these customer relationships that may not be optimized for any point in time, but give you the resiliency that when markets change, you already have commercial relationships that you can work to make your business survive. But like all things, it doesn't happen overnight. It is a strategic decision. And at times, you'll wish that you had all single family for sale and none of the commercial. But you need to keep doing a little bit of the commercial stuff there, because you never know when the worm turns. It's strategic.
Great question, Anthony. Thank you so much. Rick Hawkins, what impact or restraint does the myriad of state regulations in construction limit the ability of modular production to scale up versus component suppliers like LBM in FiOS projects?
This again is a hot item. The reality is that we have to deal with the state regulations. And so it doesn't prohibit you from scaling. It just provides a limit that you have to deal with. The components become a little bit easier, but I believe that this tool will happen over time. In fact, one of my notes out of the McKinsey report that to me they left out was, how do you bring governments into this conversation? Because you can see that one of the inhibitors to the ability to provide more attainable housing is how government chooses to interact with the industry. And all I know is somehow getting that issue brought to light in the same manner that McKinsey brought to light the productivity or lack of productivity issue, I think, and figuring out how you bring that into the world of government organizations is just as important as the things we're talking about here. Not quite the answer that Rick wanted, but he is correct in his way. I just think that entrepreneurs and disruptors figure out and take problems that are knotty, Knotty, and figure out how to solve them. And that to me is what's exciting here, that, great business people figure out a problem that other people haven't been able to solve, and they figure out how to solve it. This is one of them here. If you can figure this one out, and actually you can see the beginnings of like Clayton, their engagement with the federal regulators in terms of particularly mortgage financing and so on has opened the door for a lot of things. But you know what? It takes somebody saying, I'm going to do it.
Rick Hawkins, solve it. You got a great mind, great questions.
And Redbreast 21, that'll help.
Yeah. Jerry, you better buy a case. You got to send a bunch of bottles out. All right. TJ Jayanth, I think is how you say that. If I said it wrong, please correct me. Is there a shift in thinking needed from constructed cost to total life cycle cost and benefit before offsite construction is fully accepted? If so, how does that happen?
I don't think you need to worry about total life cycle cost before offsite construction is fully accepted. Where you see total life cycle costs actually coming to the forefront is again in the single family for rent space, and in terms of material specification, you're looking at life cycle costs rather than initial costs there, because as an owner you're thinking differently than as if you're a transactional player selling to someone else. I think the offsite construction is more about how do you reduce cycle time, reduce waste, and improve productivity. Those are things that are almost independent of total life cycle costs. I think, again, part of this is education. One of the interesting things that we've done at the Housing Innovation Alliance is really brought people into thinking about these things and how to evaluate the costs. As I said, the more important shift in thinking is how do you look across things that are non-bricks and sticks and their economic impact to understand offsite construction. When people are just looking labor and materials, lumber and labor, factory versus not, they miss all the ancillary soft cost pieces, both for the developer slash builder, but also understanding that when you get it right, the electrician's job becomes easier, the plumber's job becomes easier, the drywaller's job becomes easier, and those things all have an embedded cost in them when people bid a project until they see that it can be done correctly coming out of the factory, and they can shave time and materials off of what they do. And ultimately, that leads to lower costs and higher productivity. So I think it is the understanding of how you meld soft and hard costs in evaluation that's more important for the adoption of offsite construction.
Great.
That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
It's a good story, George. I like it. Let's have a comment here from Facebook. Quinn Chen. I think I said that all right. I guess the long existing blame culture is still very challenging to address in the construction industry. George, I say this because we have a lot of comments in here about culture.
Yeah.
And I think culture is going to be everything, I think, for these companies to go where they need to go. Agreed?
Yeah. Yeah. And, the blame culture comes from the lack of actually interactive planning together. And it's very easy to blame someone that you don't have a tight relationship with. That when you actually interactively plan and do things together, it is much easier to not blame, but to have collaboration. I go back into the FIOS system of Jerry. It is putting the people together up front, designing the house on a computer that actually enables that communication to happen rather than to blame. Blame happens when you're in silos and you're not able to communicate well.
I love it. All right. So I'm going to run through a couple just comments that we have, and that's, I think, going to be a wrap. If anybody has any last minute questions, now is the time to ask it. I just want to make sure everybody that's on here that is commenting and taking part of these discussions, it takes all of you to help make change in our industry. These conversations that we have on expert interviews are all about forwarding an industry that hasn't changed in over 100 years. And like George said earlier, it's embarrassing. So hopefully the collective, all of us and those of you out there that share this information can help us drive change and make better houses, more sustainable homes, more affordable homes. All those things can happen, but it's going to take all of us pulling in the same direction. So, of course, Tom Reddy, Synergy Steel, another great concept. Great culture brings great talent, training, and challenges. Agree with that. Rodney Hall, never short for words. Culture is as culture does. Past behaviors and employee loyalty are two of the best litmus tests for culture. Everything else is static. So,
from that comes Forrest Gump. And that's all I have to say about that.
That's all I have to say about that. That's right. All right. And then we have just a few more comments here, and then we're going to go back. I think we're going to wrap it up, George, with what you had to say about what your thoughts are on the McKinsey report. What is the wrap up? Let's have it.
I think a couple things. Number one, their ability to think about both short-term things you can do and long-term things is highly important, at least in terms of a way of having a common thinking about the way the industry works. And I think these ideas of vertical integration, consolidation, investment in technology and R&D, leading to more and more things being done off-site and brought in, you start thinking about the housing industry more aligned with maybe the auto industry in terms of how things are done in components and then brought into the assembly process in larger chunks. I think that that's a great analogy. I think the second one will be how we continue to use technology to engage with customers more holistically and longer than we do right now. And with that, if you're doing it right, you'll get not only data, intelligence, insight, but it will allow you to understand where customer pain points are and deliver on them. I keep thinking if I were a home builder and I could take an order over the internet for a new home and deliver it in 30 days, I think that would be a pretty good business model. And maybe that's hopefully what our future looks like. McKinsey is a way to help us think about that. But you know what? In the end, it's people who do it. And who are the people out there who want to take on this challenge? I wish I was 50 years younger. You know what? It'd be child labor, but it'd be fun.
You know what, George, let's do it. I really appreciate you being on the show. I'm not even going to add to that. Thank you so much for all your insight. I know everybody is very happy to listen in.
Yeah. Thank you. And thanks to all of those who chose to tune in today. Thank you, Dave.
Very much. So this is an episode of Dave Cooper Live. Stay tuned every week. George Casey, my heart shouts out to you. A big thank you. Hang in there. I'll come back to you in just a few minutes.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.